for any of our listeners who are not familiar with the King's Speech, the main thing to know is that it's got not really much to do with the King himself. He hasn't written it. It's really a ceremonial speech that's written by the government of the day, in this case, Labour, for the first time since 2009. And it essentially sets out the government's policy ambitions for the coming year. It's a press release, basically. Imagine a mega ermine, velvet, bejeweled press release. So here's a clip from King Charles speaking in the House of Lords on Wednesday.
My Lords and members of the House of Commons, my government will govern in service to the country. My government's legislative programme will be mission-led and based upon the principles of security, fairness and opportunity for all.
So a huge blizzard of policy announcements, 40 bills and draft bills announced in the King's Speech. For regular listeners of the pod, most of this is going to feel very familiar. Liz, what are your highlights from the King's Speech? Not many surprises, right?
I think no surprises. Yeah. And I think that's quite consistent with the way that the Labour Party have been. I mean, they set out over the past couple of years this quite detailed programme for government, all of the different things that they wanted to do, and Keir Starmer giving all these speeches about his missions, etc. And we saw that in the election campaign with the manifesto, that there were no surprises in that either. It was very similar actually to the content of the King's Speech, which, as you say, is just basically like a big long press release.
Huge focus on the economy, huge focus on driving growth and also liberalising planning, fighting NIMBYism and pushing housing. That's going to be a divisive element of the bill, the housing stuff, because it
always is.
This one is because it takes powers to block development away from local authorities, right? It's centralising some of that decision making.
It does, and that's one of the major blocks, and always has been in this country, is that, you know, locally people do have a lot of power to oppose housing developments, and have done. And the way that the political system tends to work in this country, because we have local MPs, they tend to, it doesn't really matter which party they're from, they always oppose big housing developments because everybody wants there to be more houses and people want their kids to be able to get on the housing ladder and for, you know, the rental sector to be better, etc., to increase supply, but nobody really wants houses to be built where they live. And so this will be a big challenge. I mean, the Conservatives put a plan on the table during their time in office, and it was actually quite a good plan. It was basically masterminded by Dominic Cummings, who, you know, doesn't give a fuck really about, you know, as we know, Conservative politicians and whether they care about planning laws. And he was kind of willing to rip up the system that we have in place and really push through. Especially one of the things was in like the beautiful places, you know, the places where there are Tory MPs and Tory councils and lots of rolling hills. And he just couldn't get it past the party. And that we see that time and time again in British politics, because it's just so unpopular locally. And the MPs and the councillors squeal. That's the thing. You end up with so many pissed off MPs and it makes your party basically ungovernable. So this is the situation that the Labour Party will be facing. So good luck to them. And the thing is about NIMBYism, I have some sympathy for it, not because I have a secret country pile that I'm trying to protect. Like, you know, I'm living in a terrace house where we get sunlight for like half an hour a day because we're just surrounded by buildings. But because you actually go and look at places where there are big housing developments, you kind of assume that they're going to just be boomers sitting in their lovely house in the middle of the countryside and just being, you know, precious about it. And actually what you find is like pretty normal people, like whatever, in a semi-detached house. I've done a lot of coverage of this, and they kind of beckon you into the back garden, and you know, they have this like small back garden that goes onto like a field, and they'll point to it and be like, we're going to have 250 houses built on there, and it's going to take 7 years, and we can't sell our house, and the value of our house has dropped, and we don't know whether, you know, what our retirement's going to be like. And you just feel like, that is shit.
Yeah.
That is really shit. So when you actually see it up close, it's you understand why there is so much local resistance to it.
Rushing through a couple of other things, we should just say on housing, we didn't mention the Renters Reform Bill, which is back on the table, ending the no-fault evictions. That's a huge thing, a really good piece of legislation that was put forward by the Conservatives that then sort of ended up getting delayed and then eventually just dropped when the election was called. That's back on the table. The return of the smoking ban and Great British Energy, which is another big thing.
Everything in the King's Speech, well, most of it speaks to this Labour ambition of growth, right?
Yeah.
That's all of these policies are related to their vision of how Britain is going to grow. Obviously, there's been a lot of criticism of that and how long will it take to deliver, and people are expecting changes in the, first few years. Were there any surprises though from the King's speech?
I don't think so. I mean, I think they've been pretty meticulous in setting out exactly what they want to do. And I think you're right. The theme of it is growth. And the interesting thing about planning is you can't wave a magic wand and get growth.
Yeah.
Like otherwise, every single politician everywhere all the time would do it because, growth is something that is, delivers so many benefits and what most governments aim for because it makes people feel positive. But you have to kind of try to slot lots of different things into place. And one of the things that can really drive growth is planning reform because that fuels the construction sector. And that is a sector that really drives the rest of the economy. And you're right, GB Energy is exactly the same type of thing, but it will be a kind of a mixture, a cocktail of things. And we'll have to kind of see if it all comes together.